More than 30 House members have signed on to a commitment to uphold the results of the 2024 election, no matter who the winner is. The group of 26 Democrats and 6 Republicans vows to certify the election and attend January's inauguration ceremony in person. The lawmakers say they want to be a voice for calm and reconciliation and speak out against those who engage in violence. Joining us now are members of the Unity Commitment, Republican Congressman Mike Lawler of New York and Democratic Congressman Josh Gottheimer of New Jersey. Thank you both very much for being on this morning.
Thanks for having us.
I guess, Mike, tell us what the reason this is for. What's the background? Why do we need this organization?
Well, and also how assure Americans, if you will, because we heard Jim Messina have some of the same fears that a lot of Americans are having, that the election will not be the end. It will just be the beginning of another 2020-like battle. I'm so glad you guys are doing this. How can you can assure Americans that we can actually move towards a peaceful transition in 2024 that we did not have in 2020?
Well, Joe and Mika, obviously the peaceful transition of power is the cornerstone of our democracy, our constitutional republic. And I have been very clear from the very beginning that Joe Biden won in 2020, that what happened on January 6th, 2021 was wrong and never should have happened. I was the first Republican in New York to put out a statement on January 6th condemning it. And so my commitment to the American people is clear. I will certify the election on January 6th, 2025, when all of the states have certified their election. And we will move forward. It is not Congress's job or responsibility to override the will of the American people. It is their job and responsibility to respect it. And that is my fundamental belief. And regardless of the outcome, and I think this is critical on both sides, regardless of the outcome, we have to accept the results. The American people will decide who the next president is. And I believe it is paramount that all of us as members of Congress accept those results, certify the election on January 6th, and show up on January 20th for the inauguration.
Congressman Gottheimer, good for both of you and for this group for making such a point of this. We know how important it is given what happened last time around, but it's not the Mike Lawlers and the Don Bacons you probably have to worry about in terms of certifying the election results and respecting them. It's some of the more fringe members who've already said out loud that they're going to help Donald Trump do whatever they have to do. So what would be your message to them this morning as we move toward Election Day?
Well, first, to join us and what Mike was just talking about, this commitment we've all made to respect the outcome of the election and to ensure calm, right? And I think that's the key word here is calm. You know, the political violence that we've just been talking about and you've been talking about and we've seen over these last years, including on the insurrection on January 6th. And by the way, I was there in the gallery. That was an insurrection. It was an attack on our democracy and our Capitol. And the fact is that in the last debate, former President Trump still refused to acknowledge the outcome of that election. He's refused to say he's going to recognize the outcome of 2024. So, of course, we're deeply concerned. I think that's why we're making it clear, and many of us are stepping out and saying early, regardless of the outcome of the election, we are going to recognize the next president of the United States. We're going to attend the inauguration, and we will do everything we can to ensure calm. And I think we need to start talking about that now. To your point, we can't wait until the night of the election when, you know, I fear that there'll be people who won't recognize the outcome and will start ensuing violence and pursuing violence. And that's what and many of us are deeply concerned about and want to get out ahead of this and make it clear that we recognize the Constitution, we recognize our democracy. There's nothing partisan about the election outcome of the actual voting, right? That is not a partisan issue. That voting is not a partisan issue, and we're going to recognize the outcome of the election.
Yeah, in a similar vein, a group of bipartisan former governors today on National Constitution Day pushing current governors to do the same, to certify the results from their states. Congressman Lawler, though, my question to you is, now the Speaker of your party Mike Johnson, were he to win again, were the Republicans to control the House and he remains Speaker on January 6th. Speaker Johnson is someone who filed an amicus brief after the 2020 election asking the Supreme Court to essentially overturn swing state results. So do you have faith that the Speaker of your party, will do his part to certify these results?
Yes, I do. Look, Speaker Johnson is a constitutional lawyer by trade. He initiated an amicus brief. It is not something that I would have signed had I been there. But look, that is a legal process, and certainly the courts are part of the process. That being said, we all have a responsibility to accept the results. And come January 6, 2025, it is my firm belief that once all options have been exhausted in the courts, which certainly legally available to any candidate at a federal level, at a state level, at a local level. But once the elections are certified, it is the responsibility of Congress to accept those results, certify the election, and move forward with the inauguration of a new president. And I have confidence that Speaker Johnson certainly will do that. I've had conversation with him in the past about this, and I am certainly confident that he will do that.
Well, Congressman Gottheimer, same question to you. You just heard your colleague's response. Do you think that Speaker Johnson, after what we saw in 2020, if Republicans continue to control the House and he remains the speakership, do you think he would certify a result that would have Donald Trump lose?
I hope Mike is right, and I hope that conversation has happened. I mean, I'm still in shock that you have so many Americans who still don't believe that Donald Trump lost in 2020, still refuse to accept that, including the former president himself, right? And who are prejudging the outcome of this election now and saying, regardless of the outcome, we're only going to recognize that President Trump is the winner. And you hear people saying that right now, right? Questioning an election that hasn't even happened yet. So I'm very concerned about that. I'm hoping that everybody does the right thing. And listen, you hear Mike speaking out. Many of his Republican colleagues have made this commitment as well as many Democrats. And we're going to circulate this and hopefully more sign on in the coming weeks. But the bottom line is, when you hear the rhetoric now, you see the political violence going on already. And we should all be worried about what happens in November and, of course, what happens on January 6th now. And we have to do everything we can as a country to come together, to put the country first, and to remind people that we may disagree, as President Biden has said, we may disagree during the election itself, but after the election, we must come together as a country, recognize the next president, attend the inauguration, ensure calm. That's a hallmark of our Constitution and our country, and that's what we're all going to be fighting to. I know we're going to have a fight now over the election, but I'll tell you what my fight's going to be about come election night, to make sure that there is calm around this country and to make sure that we all come together.
All right, Democratic Congressman Josh Gottheimer and Republican Congressman Mike Lawler, thank you both for coming on the show this morning. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.